I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?
When I was a junior in high school, I was in an AP bio class because I was smart, is the main takeaway. I failed the test, so I didn't get credit, but that's okay. It's besides the point. I was in the class. We had one experiment that I remember. I don't know why this is an experiment that stuck with me, but what happened is the teacher brought, Miss McCollum, she brought in this little vial, this little container of something. I don't know what it was. All I know is that it smelled awful. It was terrible. It was the worst smelling thing I've ever smelled in my life. And the experiment was, what you were gonna do is you were gonna put this thing under your nose and you were gonna smell it until you stopped smelling it. And I thought, that's a dumb experiment. I will just keep smelling it forever. It smells terrible. And we held it under our nose, and your partner has a stopwatch, and they press go, and you're smelling it. And basically every single time, between 30 and 45 seconds into smelling this pungent smell, it dawns on you that you no longer can smell it. Your brain actually shuts off the receptors that are receiving that scent, so you no longer notice that it's there. And it allows your brain and your nose to take in other scents, things that are changing around you. And I find it fascinating that over time, something that is powerful, that is pungent, that is potent, over time, it doesn't matter how bad it is, over time we become numb to it. Over time we block it out and we miss that it's even happening anymore. I think for a lot of us, myself included, I think a lot of us have done that with the cross. We come to church, we take communion, we talk about Jesus, we talk about grace. And yet I'm not sure we actually understand how important it is. I'm not sure we actually remember how powerful the scent is. And so for the next 2 weeks, we're just gonna sit in it. We're gonna be present with Jesus. And I'm gonna ask you to do something we don't normally do, but here's what I want you to do for the rest of this message. Can you try to put yourself where Jesus is? Can you try to feel what he felt? Can you try to be where he is? And I can ask you to do that because what's cool is when Jesus showed up on this earth, he was fully God and also fully man. So the pain that he felt, the things that he went through, the abandonment he dealt with, those are the same things that you and I could feel. We could appreciate, we can understand those emotions. So to be honest, I'm just gonna sit down, I'm just gonna talk to you today. Just keep it really simple. And if you're new here, bummer, came on a weird week, I'm glad you're here. Because this is the gospel. This is the whole point. We're meeting at this church and 17 other churches at the same time. This is the whole point of what we're doing. I'm glad you're here. I think there's probably a group of us here at campuses across the valley that would say, I'm here sometimes, but to be honest, I don't really understand the point. I have some cool friends I hang out with. I understand what we're doing. I hear we talk about, but what's the deal with this Jesus thing? I'm gonna tell you today we're gonna talk about it. Today we're gonna try to understand it. Then I also think there's a group of us, myself included, that have been on church our whole life, and we've gone numb to the cross. And it's easy to sit here and think, Jake, we're just gonna talk about the cross. I already know about the cross. I already understand it. I know enough things. And I would just tell you, if you knew enough things, why doesn't your life reflect that you know those things? Perhaps it's because you're numb to it. Perhaps it's because you've forgotten the cost. I think before we get going, it's important to understand that the reason that there even is a cross is because Jesus has to show up as a go-between for us. This is the simplified gospel is this. God created you and I. He gave us free will. He expected perfection from us. None of us can measure up to perfection. So what we needed to do in the Old Testament is we had to sacrifice something in place of our brokenness, in place of our sin. But eventually what needed to happen is God was going to send his son Jesus to be the final sacrifice for us, the final go-between, so that we wouldn't have to spend the rest of our life in damnation, but we can spend the rest of our life in heaven with God. That's the gospel, as simple as it is. And so place yourself where Jesus is. He's in this place where everybody was just hailing him as king. They were excited he was coming. He was spending time with his closest friends. He had a meal with them together, the Last Supper you may have heard of. They took a final communion together, a thing that we do every single week, that hopefully today has a little more teeth to it. And imagine in that space, he's sitting at a table with his closest friends. Can you put yourself in a space with your closest friends? Sit there, look at their eyes, understand who they are, and realize that one of them, one of your closest friends, is gonna sell you out. Gonna betray you for some money. And that happens and you're wrongly accused and all your friends are around you and this is their moment. They're gonna step in, they're gonna intercede on your behalf. But they look at you and then they simply turn and they walk away. You've been abandoned by your closest friends. That's where Jesus is. And he's arrested by the teachers of the law. He goes into this place, and the church, the place that we're at, like my friends are gonna let me down, but the church definitely is gonna let me down. My pastor is gonna let me down. My coach isn't gonna let me down. And they look at you, and they leave too. And the teachers of the law, they take him to the government because they don't have the power to actually murder someone. They don't have the power for corporate punishment. So they take him to the government. I think this is where we're going to step into the Bible. And he's in front of the government. He's in front of this guy named Pilate. And Pilate kind of thinks that there's something fishy going on. Like we probably shouldn't be putting this man on trial. He doesn't deserve it. He doesn't deserve what's coming. Chapter 27 in Matthew, it says this in verse 22. What shall I do then with Jesus who is called Christ? Pilate asked. And they all answered, and by all, the entire crowd that was there, in unison, crucify him. And I think you could potentially picture being abandoned by your friends and abandoned by the church. Can you imagine being up on a stage in front of all these people and every single person is looking at you and every single person hates you? They don't just dislike you. They aren't just confused by you, they hate you. Hate you to the point that they wish that you were dead. And they're yelling at Jesus, crucify him, crucify him. Why? What crime has he committed? But they shouted all the louder, crucify him. And when Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead there was an uproar where it was starting, he took water and he washed his hands in front of the crowd. He said, I'm innocent of this man's blood. It's your responsibility. Pilate, the government at the time, and it doesn't matter what you think of the government, the reality is you're assuming the government has your best intentions. It's gonna fight for you. Pilate is washing his hands of what's happening. He doesn't condone it, but he doesn't stop it, and he has every power to. And he chooses not to. He lets it happen. All the people answered, "Let his blood be on us and our children." Let his blood be on us and our children. Then he released Barabbas to them, who was a criminal at the time, released him instead of Jesus. But he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. I would imagine this is a line we read over quickly, like the word flogged. You may have heard it, but I think it's important to like sit in this for a little bit. The way that this worked is there was a wooden stick, and attached to this wooden stick there were 9 leather straps, and at the end of these 9 leather straps were shards of bone, shards of pottery, maybe glass or metal. And what they would do is Jesus, at this point, to be flogged, he would go up and they would tie you to a stake. You'd be bent over, and a Roman guard would have this whip, and he would go across your body. The goal is to go all the way across your back to embed the shards into your ribs and then pull. The goal was to remove flesh, to remove muscle. There's historical stories of people being flogged and literally like their insides are out of their body. There's a rule at the time that you're only supposed to flog someone 40 minus 1, 39 times, because the last one, 40, was too much, I guess. Based on all the historical data of Jesus, there was no such safety word for him. So he just kept going and going. And when they were done, the governor's soldiers took Jesus and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. And they twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand and knelt in front of him, mocking him, "Hail, the King of the Jews." Not enough to physically beat him and physically torture him. We have to humiliate him. They spit on him and they took the staff and they struck him on the head again and again. After they mocked him, they took off his robe and put on his own clothes again. Then they led him away to crucify him. I think oftentimes the crucifix or a cross is a thing we hang on our necklace. But I wonder if we've lost the scent. The cross was a torture device. It was actually the worst torture device because the goal was they'd put you on a plank, they'd nail you. It was important when they nailed through their hands that they had the exact right spot that missed both of your bones, so that the bones of your hand could support your body and allow you to breathe. You didn't die of being crucified, you died of literally suffocation. And it wasn't in hours, it was usually over days. And they'd put you in a public place so everybody could walk by and look at you and laugh at you, curse you and your family. And so Jesus is asked to carry his cross, to carry the plank he was about to get nailed to. And we know that the flogging was way worse than anybody else because he literally couldn't even do that. He'd have someone else step in and carry it for him. I think a question worth asking is why? Like, why would he not just save himself? Why would the Son of God not just show up and separate himself from this terrible pain? And I think the reality was, as terrible as the abandonment of his friends and his church, the abandonment of the government and the crowd, as terrible as the pain, I think the thing that was hardest was the actual weight of the sin of the entire world. I mentioned earlier the reason for the sacrifice of Jesus, and it really can be found in Romans. Romans 6:23 says this, "For the wages of sin is death." The reality is, for those of us who don't live a perfect life, what we deserve is death. Death on a cross. But Jesus took on all of our sin, our lust, our anger, our bitterness, the way we speak to our parents, the way we talk to our friends, the effort we give. And he held it all. And you know it was heavy because it says in Scripture that God turned away from his son. God knew this was the plan. The plan was to send my son, the son that I love, and he was going to take on all the pain and all the weight of the entire world. And he looks upon his son being crucified, and it's too hard even for him to bear, and he turns away. And Jesus on the cross, he yells out, "My God, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you left me up here? Why have you forced me to deal with this?" And the answer is that Jesus had to withstand all of that for me. Are you there yet? Are you in the space with Jesus? Do you understand the pain and the hurt? Because I read this yearly, we talk about it at Easter, and sometimes it's still hard to click. And so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do something a little different. We're gonna show you a depiction of what this could look like. And I'm gonna be honest, it's kind of graphic. And if that's squeamish for you, if you're allowed to not look. But I think I'd actually tell you to look. I think I'd actually tell you to be present and to watch and to appreciate what Jesus did on the cross. I want to make sure we don't lose the scent. The cost was high, but Jesus did it for you. Let's watch this clip.